Hey everyone, how's it going? So about a month ago, I released a video on how to catch every possible Pokemon in Generation 1 and Generation 2, and people really seemed to like that video. At the end of the video, I sorta teased doing this video on Generation 3, and that quickly became the most requested video this channel has ever gotten by a mile. So today, that's exactly what we're gonna do. And if you saw the last video and thought getting all 249 possible Generations 1 and 2 Pokemon was tough, then you haven't seen anything yet. But before we even start talking about catching the now 386 Pokemon, we should talk about some changes that were made between Generations 2 and 3. You see, Generation 3 was on the Game Boy Advance, and so Game Freak took advantage of that to change a couple things that they didn't really like. The first thing they didn't like is how Pokemon statistics were calculated. Now ordinarily in a video like this, we wouldn't be talking about Pokemon statistics, but it's sort of relevant because the new way of calculating statistics made it really difficult to migrate Pokemon from Generation 2 to Generation 3. Combining that with the fact it was on new hardware, Game Freak obviously decided it was not worth their while to allow for compatibility between the older and newer games, and so every single Pokemon we would have caught in Generations 1 and 2 on a physical cartridge are stuck just there till today. Which is not only very unfortunate, but it means that in our quest to catch every Pokemon, we're going to be starting from square one. The other thing I want to talk about is a change that made it a little difficult to talk about what it means to catch them all. You see, in Generations 1 and 2, it was simple. Catching them all was filling up the Pokedex. I mean, in Johto, there was the Johto Dex, but it was just a reordering of the National Dex. However, starting in Generation 3, Game Freak would start having these smaller Pokedexes that would only contain the newer Pokemon and some returning Pokemon. In Generation 3's Hoenn Dex, a mere 67 of the original 250 Pokemon we all knew and loved would be returning, and the rest of the Pokedex would be filled out by 135 new Hoenn Pokemon, which were fine, but this really frustrated me as a kid, and I don't want to really go over old gripes, but I still find it kinda weird and a little annoying that Gold and Silver on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color had enough room for 250 Pokemon in its Pokedex, and yet Ruby and Sapphire on the brand new Game Boy Advance only had enough room, supposedly, for 200 Pokemon. That just doesn't seem right. With that in mind, I thought it'd be interesting to start out by filling in our Hoenn Pokedex in Ruby and Sapphire, and then working our way to the National Dex, which now contains 386 Pokemon. So like I did in the last video, let's start off by seeing how many Pokemon we can catch using a single game of Ruby and Sapphire and one Game Boy Advance. Now right off the bat, we can eliminate Deoxys and Jirachi, the two mythicals. They're not catchable unless you resort to hacking or cheating, which as you remember, we are not doing in these videos, so that brings us down to 200. Additionally, like pretty much every other Pokemon game in the main series that I can think of, you're not going to be able to get a second starter, so that's 6 starters that are going to be eliminated. I picked Mudkip, for example, so the Torchic line and the Trico line are going to be uncatchable in this playthrough. Also in Ruby and Sapphire, there are new fossils introduced, and I always picked Anorith, so I think Armaldo is just really cool, but that means Lileep and Cradily are not going to be catchable, bringing us down to 194. Now, while I'm still not happy that Game Freak decided to make the regional deck smaller than it was in Johto, I'm not sad they decided to also make the version exclusive count way smaller. There are a mere 6 version exclusives in Ruby and Sapphire. In Ruby, you can't catch the Lotad line, Sableye, Seviper, and Lunatone, while in Sapphire you can't catch the Seedot line, Mawile, Zangoose, and Solrock, but that's it. That's really, really friendly, Game Freak. Thanks so much. And we're actually almost done. There's going to be 6 more Pokemon we can't catch with a single playthrough, because they need to be traded. 4 of these are returnees from other generations, so we have Alakazam, Golem, and Machamp from Generation 1, Kingdra from Generation 2, and now Huntail and Gorebyss, Clamperl's evolutions, also need to be traded in Gen 3. So that brings our total down to 182, and we are almost done actually. There are just 2 more Pokemon we're going to eliminate. So a lot of you guys seem to think that in Gold and Silver you couldn't catch the other mascot legendary, but that wasn't the case. It was starting Ruby and Sapphire that the other mascot would not be catchable in the game. So what I mean by this is that in Ruby, Kyogre is uncatchable, and in Sapphire, Groudon is uncatchable. There's actually 1 more uncatchable Pokemon. Thankfully, they didn't make the legendary golems roaming, although I don't like the puzzles, quote-unquote, they used. They did, however, create the Eon Pokemon, or the Lati Pokemon, whatever you call them. and Latias is not catchable in Ruby, and Latios is not catchable in Sapphire. But yeah, that brings our grand total down to 180, and that is one of the best percentages in the entire Pokemon series. Additionally, filling out our Hoenn regional decks is really easy this time around. You're going to need a second Game Boy Advance and a link cable, and you have to beat each game a full time. The reason for this is that Latios and Latias won't start roaming until you beat the Elite Four, but you catch every possible Pokemon in one, you catch all the remaining version exclusives in the other, you pick a different starter, let's say Torchic, you pick the other fossil, you catch the other legendary, you make all the trades you need to make, and that'll bring your total up to 197. And in fact, getting all possible 200 Pokemon just requires a quick 5-minute reset and getting the last starter Pokemon. And there you have it. You have all 200 of a possible 202 regional Pokemon in Hoenn. And it really wasn't that difficult this time around. However, I'm pretty sure most of you clicked on this video not just to figure out how to catch all 200 Hoenn Pokemon, but to get all 386 Pokemon in the National Dex. So let's move on to the next games in the series, which are pretty much straight up remakes of Red and Blue called Firered and Leafgreen. Now, especially in the main game, there are very few, if any, changes to the story and the Pokemon catchable, but there are some. And because my quest to catch them all did start with catching all 150 Pokemon, like the song said, I thought it'd be fun to see whether or not it's easier to catch them all in Generation 3's Firered and Leafgreen, or in the original Red and Blue. So once again, let's start with a single cartridge playthrough of one of the games. Now, in case you don't remember, this was the final list of uncatchable Pokemon in Red and Blue from the last video, and already we're going to notice that some of these Pokemon are going to be obtainable in Firered and Leafgreen due to changes in mechanics. Although it doesn't become unlocked till the post-game, you can eventually breed Pokemon in Firered and Leafgreen, and thus you can get the other two evolutions and the Hitmon you didn't pick by breeding for them, giving us a +3 over Red and Blue. We still can't get 6 of the starters, 2 of the fossil Pokemon, and the 4 Kanto Pokemon that require to be traded, but we're off to a really good start. And then you see the version exclusive list. Now, I know Red and Blue had a lot of version exclusives themselves, but Firered and Leafgreen went absolutely nuts. I think someone at Game Freak realized they didn't have enough version exclusives in Ruby and Sapphire, and they made up for it and then some in Firered and Leafgreen. So just among the 150 Kanto Pokemon, there are 13 version exclusives. That's nearly 10% of the Pokedex locked away to each version. That's insane. Now, the lists are largely similar, but in Leafgreen, you actually now can catch the Mankey line, but in exchange, you cannot catch the Shelder line or the Psyduck line, and the Ekans line, the Oddish line, the Growlithe line, Scyther, and Electabuzz remain exclusive to the red version. Speaking of which, you now can catch Meowth and Persian, but you still can't catch the Sandshrew line, the Vulpix line, the Bellsprout line, Magmar and Pinsir, and now you can no longer catch the Slowpoke line or the Staryu line. That puts our grand total for Firered and Leafgreen at 125, or exactly 1 higher than it was in Red and Blue. But if you thought that it wouldn't be easier to catch them all this time around, you'd be wrong, because when we bring in that second cartridge, it gets far easier. So obviously, we're going to need to complete the game once. I mean, we would have needed to anyway to unlock Cerulean Cave to get Mewtwo, and the game we actually want to beat is Leaf Green. Usually it doesn't matter, but here it is Leaf Green because Magmar is a Leaf Green exclusive, and Magmar only becomes unlocked after the 7th gym. And you might have realized by that, the second game, Fire Red, we're only going to play up to the 5th gym, because once you acquire Surf and have the badge to use it, you can get all the remaining Pokemon that you could not get in Leaf Green. The Pokemon I was really having a hard time figuring out how to get quickly were the fossils, and I realized all you would need is Surf because you get the fossil really quickly to get to Cinnabar, and you don't actually need Sabrina's badge at all. So that saves you a lot of time, but there is a catch. The catch is, this only is if you want to just fill out the Kanto Dex. What if you want to use Firered and Leafgreen to fill out the National Dex? Well, catching every Kanto Pokemon would add 103 to your total, because there are 47 Kanto Pokemon catchable in Ruby and Sapphire. However, after you beat the main game in Firered and Leafgreen, there are a whole bunch of Johto Pokemon you can catch. In fact, between Firered and Leafgreen, there are 44 Johto Pokemon you can catch, but there is, well, a catch to this. Remember how I said Game Freak went nuts with version exclusives this time around? Well, I didn't even mention 9 of them because they were Johto Pokemon and we were only focusing on the Kanto decks. Yes, in Fire Red, we cannot catch Slowking, Misdreavus, Sneasel, the Remoraid line, Mantine, and Magby, and you also can't catch the Marill line, but good for us, Marill is catchable in Ruby and Sapphire, so we don't need to care. Additionally, you can't catch Blossom and Skarmory and Leaf Green, but they are catchable in Ruby and Sapphire, but these guys aren't. The Wooper line, Murkrow, Quillfish, Scizor, Delibird, and Elekid, you gotta use both games, and that means we're gonna have to play through both games one complete time, and we're still not gonna get to that 44 total. In fact, it's very likely at this point, even if you've done everything I've said, you've only caught 41 of the possible 44 Johto Pokemon, because the last 3 are the legendary beasts or dogs, whatever you call them, and they are a pain to catch. I mean, they're pretty much the exact same as they were in Generation 2, with one exception. You see, Game Freak didn't really program how Roar worked properly, so if the legendary beast you find roars you, well, it's gone forever. And if you didn't save, well, too bad. Time to reset, I guess. So you gotta be aware of that. Additionally, only one of the legendary beasts appears, and it's based on your starter. So if you want all 3, you guessed what that means, we're gonna have to play through one of the games 2 complete times into the post-game, because the beasts do not start roaming until Lorelei returns from Icefall Cave, which happens in the post-game. And even once you've done all this, which to recap is playing through Ruby once, playing through Sapphire once, resetting Ruby very quickly to get the last starter, playing through Fire Red twice, and playing through Leaf Green once, we still are missing 39 Pokemon. Oh where are they? So, some of them are a little easier to catch than others. You see, 2 Pokemon we're missing are Espeon and Umbreon. And while Eevee is catchable in Fire Red and Leaf Green, Espeon and Umbreon aren't because there is no day-night cycle in Fire Red Leaf Green. If you open up the cartridge, you'll see there actually is no battery, and so the game doesn't have a way to calculate day and night, so it just doesn't. The only way to get Espeon and Umbreon in the main series is to simply trade an Eevee over to Ruby, Sapphire, or Emerald, which we're going to be talking about in a second, and doing the same friendship level up during the day or night. So it really isn't that hard. Realistically, we should be at 349 right now, which means we have 37 left to go, which are the 4 Mythicals, the 9 Johto Starters, these 22 perfectly regular Johto Pokemon, and the last 2 are Ho-Oh and Lugia. And thankfully, in 2005, along came Pokemon Emerald, which made almost all of these Pokemon obtainable. Notice how I said almost, but we'll get to that in a second. Now, unfortunately, those Johto Pokemon are actually available in the Safari Zone, which I always hate to use. And the Safari Zone extension, which is where you find them, only opens after you beat the Hall of Fame. So we're going to need to play through Emerald one complete time. However, since we're doing that, we actually don't need to play through Ruby or Sapphire a complete time. You see, I figured out that since we play through Emerald, and Emerald does allow you to get both fossils, the only game you need to beat is Emerald. Unfortunately, we have to use both Ruby and Sapphire still, because like always, the 3rd version always has some version exclusive sharing so that you can't use just it in one other game. So if you played Emerald and Sapphire, you wouldn't be able to catch Zangoose, and Emerald and Ruby won't allow you to catch Lunatone, but both those Pokemon are available near Meteor Falls, which only requires you to have 3 badges in order to access. Now, we would be done there, except that Emerald also has Meditite as a version exclusive, and Meditite is only catchable in Mount Pyre. So one of the games we're going to need to collect 3 badges, and our journey stops at Meteor Falls. The other game, our journey stops at Mount Pyre. But that's not too bad of a deal. That is, until we talk about the Johto Starters. You see, when you complete the Hoenn Pokedex, Professor Birch and Emerald will reward you with one of the Johto Starters, and it would make sense based on the way we're doing this, to have Emerald be the game where we complete the Pokedex. But the thing is, we need all of the Johto Starters, and the only way we'd be able to do this just using the main series is absolutely ridiculous. Now, the only way to do this, and please don't try this because it's absolutely absurd, is just mind-bogglingly dumb. So what you'd need to do is you need to fill out your Hoenn Pokedex in Emerald. You'd also have a bunch of Johto Pokemon from the Safari Zone. Great. after you get your Johto starter, you need to now trade them all into either Ruby or Sapphire, meaning you need to have enough space and enough extra Pokemon to trade back, alright? It's going to take you a really long time. It takes 31 seconds for the trade animation to start and finish, and there's also some menuing time. So if you had, let's say, all 200 Pokemon, you had a living dex, because that's what we're going to end up needing, that would take you, of just trading animations, over an hour and a half. It would probably take you closer to 3-4 hours because you're going to take some sort of breaks. And that's if you take minimal breaks, alright? After you finish trading all your Pokemon to Sapphire, you reset, and then you have to, and I'm not kidding, catch 200 Poochyena, Tailo, whatever, in Emerald. Like, that's what you're going to need to do, because you need to trade all your Pokemon you just traded back to Sapphire, back into Emerald, go to Professor Birch, get your second Johto starter. Then trade them all back and do it a third time. There is no way anyone should ever do this thing. This is so dumb. And it doesn't even fill out your Pokedex because you're still missing Ho-Oh and Lugia. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, okay, there has to be a better way. This is absurd. And there is, but like the slogan of this video should be at this point, there's a catch. You see, there have always been spin-off games on consoles, and we haven't talked about them because they usually aren't necessary for completing the Pokedex. But in Generation 3, if you want every possible Pokemon you can catch, you will have to get a GameCube and play Pokemon Coliseum and Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness. And these games are okay. I mean, they're fundamentally Pokemon games, they're single-player experiences, but they're a little different from the regular Pokemon games. I mean, in a regular Pokemon game, you're at a lab, you get a starter Pokemon, you try and catch them all, you beat gyms, beat the Elite Four. That's not how these games work at all. They simply have single-player stories that you have to play through. You don't get to pick your starter Pokemon. In Coliseum, you start with an Espeon and an Umbreon, and in XD, you start with an Eevee. And basically, there are no wild Pokemon. The way you catch Pokemon in this game is you actually steal them from other trainers, but don't worry, these Pokemon aren't being well treated. You see, the main plotline of these games is that there's this evil organization called Cypher that has artificially closed the hearts of these Pokemon and turned them into soulless killing machines called Shadow Pokemon. Your job is to snag all the Shadow Pokemon from these trainers and turn them back to normal. Now, I'd love to say this is optional, but if you want that Ho-Oh, unfortunately, you have to snag every single Shadow Pokemon, all 48 of them, which will take you through the main story and a bit of the post-game, and then you have to purify them all, and this is what takes so long. So let's look at my save game file. You can see it's over 40 hours. Catching the Pokemon, that can be a little tricky, but it's not the main reason for that time. Catching Pokemon is tricky because, one, all battles are double battles, which is kind of cool but makes catching a little harder, and all Shadow Pokemon have a move called Shadow Rush, which does recoil damage, of course. So if you deal too much damage, they can end up fainting themselves before you catch them. So certain Pokemon like Metagross are really annoying to catch, but the main reason for that time is purifying. Turning a Shadow Pokemon back into a regular Pokemon is no easy feat in Coliseum. Basically, you have this Shadow meter that replaces your experience meter, and it decreases slowly every time you send a Pokemon out in battle, and I think even when you walk, but it's really slowly. These Shadow meters differ by Pokemon, and the further you go into the game, the longer it takes to purify the Pokemon on average. Now, the quickest way I found to purify Pokemon is that sometimes, randomly, Shadow Pokemon will go into what's called Hyper Mode, which makes their attacks a little bit stronger, but you can use a button called Call, and that will turn them back into not Hyper Mode and take a little chunk out of their Shadow meter. Like I said, this happens randomly, and sometimes you can purify Pokemon really quickly like this. Sometimes they never go into Hyper Mode, and it takes forever because you just get the little decrease every time you send them out into battle. But you need to do a ton of battling, and this takes a really long time because there are 48 Shadow Pokemon to catch and purify, and once you've done all that, you still don't get the friggin' Ho-Oh. No, you gotta go into multiplayer mode, use a team from your main game, and take on the Mount Battle Challenge. In Mount Battle, you face 100 trainers consecutively, and if you lose at any point, you're done. Thankfully, if you get through a battle without losing a Pokemon, you get to continue, but you need to battle 100 trainers. 100! This takes a really long time. You can't, turn off animations or anything. So once you beat 100 friggin' trainers, then finally, you get a Ho-Oh deposited into your account, and we have one more Pokemon to get. We're still not done. We now have to play through XD Gale of Darkness, but thankfully, while it's fundamentally the same game as Colosseum, there are a few things that make it easier. For one, purifying Pokemon is way easier. There's now this Purification Chamber, which is a little weird to explain, but essentially, you can put a bunch of regular Pokemon in a circle to purify a Shadow Pokemon as you walk. So the way to purify Shadow Pokemon the quickest are to put Pokemon in such a way so that the Pokemon to everyone's left is super effective against the Pokemon to the right. And there are 9 of these rooms, with the Shadow Pokemon being in the middle, and it actually doesn't take too long to purify Shadow Pokemon. And we don't have to purify all of them this time around. We only have to purify really one of them, Lugia. This time it's actually a Shadow Pokemon itself, and purifying it takes like 2 seconds. Unfortunately, Lugia is available just before the final battle, kind of like Zekrom and Reshiram would be in Black and White. But you catch the Shadow Lugia, and those rooms I was talking about in the Purification Chamber, there's actually 9 of them, and if all of them are set up optimally, you just have to put Shadow Lugia in the middle of one of them, and it is instantly purified and ready to trade. I should have mentioned this before, but you cannot trade Shadow Pokemon, and that is it. Now, as annoying as this all is, I would be remiss not to mention that there are some perks of using Colosseum and XD. For one, like I mentioned before, we no longer need Emerald, because the Johto Starters, for example, are all catchable in Colosseum. So that ridiculous fill up the Hoenn Pokedex 3 times thing, we don't have to do, because we get all the mid-level Johto Starters in Colosseum, and we actually have to get them. Additionally, in Firered and Leafgreen, we don't have to play through the games many times, or you actually don't have to play through Firered at all, because the legendary beasts are all snaggable in Colosseum as well. In fact, I found out a way if you want to save money, you can just play through Leafgreen one full time, one time to the 5th gym to get the second fossil, and then a third time just to get the last starter. Also, in case you were wondering, all those Pokemon available in the Safari Zone extension in Emerald, all snaggable in XD or Colosseum. So with that being said, here is our new strategy to get all 382 non-mythical Pokemon without cheating or glitching, alright? We play through Ruby one complete time. We play through Sapphire complete time, do a quick reset. We play through Leaf Green a complete time, catching all those Johto Pokemon only available in the post-game. We play through Leaf Green again till the 5th gym, do the other fossil, trade everything over, do it a 3rd time, and then just get the starter. Then we play through Colosseum and XD, catching all the Pokemon we're missing, and making sure we get every Pokemon in Colosseum to get Ho-Oh, and we would be done if not for the fact that there's actually a way to get one more Pokemon, and that Pokemon is Jirachi. You see, if you pre-ordered Pokemon Colosseum, it came with a bonus disc, most of which you wouldn't care about, but there is one thing on that bonus disc that is really cool, and that lets you transfer a Jirachi onto Ruby or Sapphire. So these discs are still available. They're around 20 bucks, and I got mine about a year ago on a used game website. They work perfectly well, and I did it myself, and there you go. We have 383 Pokemon, and if you actually did this like I did, congratulations. This takes forever. And unfortunately, or happily, that is the end of this video. I cannot believe how long this video lasted, and there were so many things I had to go over in not as much detail as I would have wanted, but like I said, it is absolutely crazy to catch all the Pokemon in this generation. I will eventually make a video for Gen 4, but you guys are going to have to wait a little bit longer for that one, because this took me forever, and I think I need a break from catching them all. But thank you for watching, have an awesome day everyone, see ya.